I was a teacher in my mid-30s when a group of students came up to me one day, very excited, and told me that they had just submitted my name to become a contestant on the TV show, What's Not to Wear. So I have been what's not to wearing clothes for a long time. But even I, a fashion misfit, know that no woman wants to put on a bridesmaid's dress. I donned my first when I was 23. My friend Angela was getting married and asked me to be in her wedding, and I said, well, of course, even though a little voice in the back of my head said, well, this could be really bad. But I had no idea just how into it Angela would go. Like, she went all in. And so we're talking sleeveless, bright pink, taffeta tinged, body hugging, blech. Oh, and then there were pink high heels too. Now, in her defense, it was the 80s. About a week before the wedding, I sat around and kind of started to imagine how this whole thing would go. And there was not one thing that looked good for me. I just thought, this is going to be disastrous. I could picture myself tripping down the aisle and my big braless boobs busting out all over. And the only thing that gave me any kind of consolation was knowing that I'd have 4 friends in that equally goofy getup. And on the day of the wedding, I pulled up to 2 of those friends' house, Holly and Jan. And these 2 are sisters, and they're really smart, and they're really quiet, and they're really classy. But when I pulled up and then they opened up the door and came out in those pink monstrosities, I was like, oh, classy clowns. They were really hard to miss. And if you don't believe me, ask the bird that pooped all over Holly's dress as she was walking to my car. And so began the night of the taffeta disaster. When we got to the church, we found the other bridesmaids in a room off the chapel, and they were putting on their final touches. And as we walked in, one of them, Kay, was holding a pair of pantyhose. And so she was getting ready to put them on, so as is the case, she bent over, and at that moment, we all heard what was a distinct sound of clothing tearing. She had a gap about this long on the side of her dress, and I just was like taking it in. A few minutes later, another bridesmaid decided it was time to put on her makeup. So she reached in her purse and she grabbed a bottle of foundation and shook it up. And she was opening the bottle, and as she pulled the lid away, a thread of the foundation went all over the front of her dress. I am not kidding. So at this point, Miss What Not to Wear? Yeah, I'm starting to panic because I'm thinking, oh, something horrible is going to happen to me, probably in a really public way. I would have my answer soon enough. 15 minutes before the big show, and only 2 of us remain untainted. And that's when Mary, the other untainted bridesmaid, decided she'd grab a pop from the machine in the hallway. So she took a couple of quarters, she fed them into the machine, she pushed the Diet Coke button, and as she bent over to grab that can, the most amazing thing happened. You see, there was a tiny hole in that can, and as she bent down, it went all over the front of her dress. I know. And I'm standing here thinking, if I could move with any speed in this dress, I would turn around and get in my car and go home. Because you can't be a what not to wear woman and expect that something good is about to happen, right? But you know what? Nothing happened to me. I walked down that aisle, my heels behaved, my boobs supported, my dress pristine. And by the time we bridesmaids lined up shoulder to shoulder on the altar, I felt jubilant. Couldn't believe it. And then the ceremony starts, and I find my mind wandering over the absurdities of the last hour. And I'd like to think I could be forgiven for getting a little case of the giggles. But you know what happens, and you know what happens when you start giggling at a time or in a place when you absolutely should not giggle? Like you go all in. So I'm like, oh, and did I mention that we were shoulder to shoulder? Took about 15 seconds till all 5 of us looked like we were doing some kind of weird armless version of the wave. We were out of control. And finally, I leaned forward and I stage whispered, "Act like you're crying." So their hands went up, and then we tried to snurfle and whatever sound a deeply moved woman. It was pathetic. And I'm so grateful that Angela had her back to us up there on the altar. By the time the couple lit the unity candle, doggone it if us bridesmaids weren't unified in some kind of semblance of silence. Until, and of course there's an until, right? Strangely enough, what really got us was the Our Father, which I'd never really thought of as funny. But I think what happened is that we somehow missed the memo at the rehearsal when the minister said, "Man, now I'll be singing the Our Father." And so we were not prepared at all for when he stood up there, a fine man, took a deep breath, and he opened his mouth, and out came the glorious baritone note. Ah! Are you kidding? Are you kidding me? We just collapsed. Now, I don't remember much more of the night, and I'm sorry to say that the marriage did not survive its fiascoed beginnings. But my dress, my perfect pink dress, I was starting to think of it as some kind of a good luck charm, you know? So when my sister got married a year later, I wore that dress to her wedding. And I walked down the aisle, nearly confident, almost like a woman who knows what to wear and how to wear it.